Who is that man that just dropped you off? For the fourth time, Wale had asked, his voice tense, barely masking the anger and fear bubbling beneath the surface. Lola walked past him without a glance, her heels clicking against the floor. Her expression hardened as if she hadn't heard him or didn't care to respond. Her silence felt like a slap against his face. Lola, Wale called again, his voice louder this time, desperate for an answer. She stopped at the foot of the stairs, her back still turned to him. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she inhaled deeply before turning around to face him. Wale, I am tired. Her tone was heavy with exhaustion. I don't have time to deal with your insecurities. Insecurities, Wale echoed, his heart twisting at the word. His insecurities. Is that what she thought this was? Lola's frown deepened, her eyes narrowing slightly, and without another word, she turned and ascended the stairs, leaving Wale standing alone in the living room. The door to their bedroom door clicked shut softly, but to Wale, it sounded like a door closing on everything they once shared. His throat tightened, his eyes stinking with unshed tears. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms as the reality of her words sank in. Insecurities. Was that what their relationship had come to? Him doubting, questioning, while she brushed him off as if his concerns were meaningless. Wale ran a hand through his hair, pacing the small space in the living room, his mind raced, replaying the image of her stepping out of that car. She hadn't even looked back. Didn't she know how much it hurt him? Didn't she care? The pit in his stomach only deepened with every step he took. He had never been the jealous type. Not before. Not when they were younger. Not even when she got a new job and started working late. But now, things felt different. They were different. He could feel the distance growing between them, and no matter how hard he tried to bridge the gap, it seemed to widen. With every question he asked, every time he tried to get closer to her, Wale stopped pacing and sat back down, rubbing his hands over his face in frustration. His mind spun in circles. Who was the man? Why wouldn't she answer him? His thoughts stumbled over one another, the same question ringing through his mind. What had changed? Upstairs, Lola sat on the edge of their bed, her hands trembling slightly. As she removed her earrings, she hated this constant tension, the endless suspicion. It felt like a noose tightening around her. She was exhausted, emotionally drained from the constant need to explain herself. Downstairs, Wale sat in the dimly lit living room, staring blankly at the wall. His thoughts were muddled, filled with a mix of love, anger, and fear. He remembered the early days of their relationship, the laughter, the late-night conversations that stretched into the morning. They had been so close, so connected. What had gone wrong? He wasn't a fool. He could see the changes in Lola, how distant she had become, how secretive, and every time he tried to ask, every time he tried to reach out, she pushed him away, called him insecure. Maybe he was insecure. Maybe all the love he had for her turned into something darker, something that made him question everything. Wale swallowed hard, feeling the sting of tears in his eyes. He couldn't lose her, not like this. But how could he hold on when it felt like she was already slipping through his fingers? He stood up suddenly, his heart racing as he headed for the stairs. He couldn't let the night end like this, with them in separate rooms, with so much unsaid. Reaching the bedroom door, Wale paused, his hand hovering over the knob. He could hear the soft hum of the TV through the door. But otherwise, the house was silent. He knocked lightly, waiting for a response. Lola, he called, his voice softer now. Can we talk, please? There was a long pause, and for a moment, Wale thought she wouldn't answer. But then the door creaked open, and Lola stood there, her arms crossed over her chest, her expression unreadable. What is it, Wale? She asked quietly, her voice carrying a weariness that matched her appearance. I'm sorry, Wale began, his voice cracking. He hadn't expected to feel this emotion, but standing there, looking at her, the weight of his words hit him. All at once, I don't want to fight. I just want us to understand what is happening between us. Lola's eyes softened, her arms dropping to her sides as she leaned against the door frame. Wale, I don't know what you want me to say. I'm not cheating on you, I've told you that, but this constant questioning, it's breaking us. I'm scared, Wale admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared that I'm losing you. Lola closed her eyes briefly, her heart aching at his confession. She stepped forward, taking his hands in hers. You're not losing me, Wale, but you need to trust me. If you can't trust me, then we're already lost. Wale nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. I don't want to lose you, Lola. I don't. But I need you to talk to me, to be open with me. I can't keep guessing what's going on. Lola sighed, her hands tightening around his. I will, Wale, but you have to stop accusing me of things that aren't true. I'm tired of feeling like I'm constantly under suspicion. I'm sorry, Wale said again. His voice thick with emotion. I will try, I promise. Lola nodded, pulling him into a tight embrace. As they stood there, holding each other in the dim light of their bedroom. Wale and Lola's marriage had always been built on laughter, late night conversations, and the simple joy of being in each other's presence. After a long day, they would collapse into bed, catching up on each other's days, their voices low and filled with love. Do you remember that time at your office party? Lola had laughed one night, her head resting on Wale's chest as they lay in bed. When you tried to impress everyone without your ridiculous dance move. Wale chuckled, his arm wrapped around her. Ridiculous. That was pure talent. I had the whole place cheering. You had the whole place cringing, you mean, Lola teased, poking aside. Well, you were the one who begged me to dance with you. Wale shot back with a grin. Couldn't resist my moves, could you? Lola playfully rolled her eyes. Yeah, because watching you embarrass yourself is one of my favorite pastimes. They laughed, their bodies shaking with the joy that had always come so easily between them. In moments like that, nothing else mattered. Work, stress, life, all of it faded away when they were together. But then things began to change. It started the night Lola came home, her face glowing with excitement. Wale had arrived home early and prepared dinner, her favorite pasta dish, with garlic bread on the side. The kitchen was filled with the warm smell of tomatoes and herbs when she burst through the door, a takeout bag in her hand. Wale, she called out, her voice carrying through the house. She found him in the kitchen, wiping his hands on the towel as he turned to greet her. Hey babe, Wale said, smiling. I made dinner. Look what Steve bought for me, Lola interrupted, holding up the takeout bag as if it was a trophy. Wale's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. Who's Steve? He asked casually, turning back to the stove to finish stirring the sauce. Oh, my new colleague, Lola beamed, placing the bag on the counter. It's so nice. I can't believe his wife left him, poor guy. You've been through so much. Wale paused, his hand gripping the spoon a little tighter than usual. Something about the way she said it, the ease with which she talked about Steve. The light in her eyes, it made his stomach twist. But he pushed the feeling down, not wanting to overreact. That's nice of him, Wale said, his voice a little strained. But I made your favorite pasta. We should eat together. Oh, of course, Lola said. I just wanted to show you. Wale nodded, but the unease lingered. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but something felt off. He tried to shake it off as they sat down to dinner, talking, laughing like they always did. But the seed of doubt had already been planted. In the days that followed, Steve's name seemed to come up more and more often in their conversation. It started innocently enough, Lola mentioning a funny story from work or a kind gesture Steve had made. Steve bought everyone coffee today, Lola said one evening, and they sat on the couch watching TV. You even remembered how I like mine, extra cream, no sugar. Can you believe that? Wale smiled tightly, trying to focus on the show. That's thoughtful. He's just such a nice guy, Lola continued, oblivious to the growing tension in Wale's jaw. It's crazy how his wife just left him like that. He doesn't deserve it. Wale shifted uncomfortably, turning the volume up on the TV slightly, hoping to drown out the nagging feeling in his chest. He didn't say anything, but the unease was growing. Why was she talking about Steve so much? Why did she care so much about his life, his feelings? One Saturday afternoon, they were in the kitchen preparing lunch. Lola was chopping vegetables, her hands moving expertly as she chatted about her week. Wale stood next to her, stirring a pot on the stove. Steve's going through a tough time, Lola said. I turned sympathetic. He mentioned that he's been feeling really down lately. Wale's hand stilled on the spoon. There it was again, Steve's name, slipping into their conversation like an uninvited guest. Lola, do you have to talk about him so much? Wale asked, his voice betraying the frustration he's been trying to hide. Lola looked up surprised. What do you mean? I mean, it feels like every time we talk, it's about Steve. Wale said, turning to face her. You're always mentioning him, and it's starting to feel strange. Lola frowned, setting the knife down. Wale, it's just a colleague. We're friends. There's nothing more to it. I know, Wale said, his voice softening. But I don't know. It feels like you care about him a little too much. Lola crossed her arms, her expression hardening slightly. You're being ridiculous. He's going through a rough time and I'm just being supportive, that's it. Wale sighed, running a hand through his head. The weeks passed and though Wale tried to push his feelings aside, the distance between them grew. Lola's conversations were filled with updates about Steve's life. His struggles, his successes, his plans. Wale tried to be patient. Tried to tell himself that it was nothing, but every time he heard Steve's name, his heart sank a little further. One night, after yet another mention of Steve at dinner, Wale couldn't hold it in any longer. Lola, do you even realize how much you hurt me when you talk about this person? Wale asked, his voice tied with emotion. Lola blinked, surprised by the sudden outburst. What are you talking about? Steve, Wale said, his voice rising. Every day, it's Steve this, Steve that. I'm your husband, Lola, not him. Lola's eyes widened, and for a moment, she seemed taken aback. But then her expressions hardened. Wale, you're being ridiculous. Steve is just a friend. A friend to talk about more than me? Wale shot back, his voice trembling with frustration. Lola stood up from the table, her face flushed with anger. I can't believe you're acting like this. There's nothing going on with Steve, nothing. Wale watched her walk away, his heart aching. He wanted to believe her, but the doubt, the fear, it was gnawing at him, threatening to tear them apart. And he didn't know how to stop it. Wale had never minded playing the role of a supportive husband. He took pride in surprising Lola, picking her up from work and being a rock whenever she needed it. But when her car broke down that morning, he felt a pang of worry as he promised to come get her later that day. After all, it was just a minor setback, nothing they couldn't handle together. As he arrived at Lola's office that afternoon, the sun was beginning to dip, casting a warm glow over the bustling parking lot. Wale parked his car and made his way into the building, greeting a few familiar faces. The lively atmosphere usually brought him joy, but today something felt off. He approached the reception desk, where a cheerful young woman sat. Hey, I'm here to pick up Lola, he said, a smile on his face. The receptionist's smile faded slightly. Oh, she left with a colleague a while ago, she said, her voice gentle but firm. Colleague? Wale repeated, the name sounding foreign and unsettling in his mouth. Steve, right? The receptionist nodded. Yeah, they were just going to grab some food since her car broke down. I think they left around 5. Thanks, he managed to say, the weight of her words settling heavily in his chest as he turned to leave. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind as he walked back to his car. He called Lola several times on the way home, but it went straight to voicemail each time. She must already be home, he muttered to himself, trying to quell the uneasy feeling twisting in his stomach. However, when he arrived home, the silence greeted him like an unwelcome guest. He checked the time. It was nearing midnight. The anxiety surged within him as he tossed his key onto the table, pacing back and forth in the living room. Where could she be? He whispered to himself, his heart pounding. The shadows of doubt began to creep into his mind, each one darker than the last. Hours later, just as he was about to lose hope, the sound of laughter drifted through the front door. Wale shot upright, his heart racing. He opened the door just as Lola stepped inside, giggling as she climbed out of a car. Hey, you're home, she exclaimed, her eyes sparkling, completely unfazed by the late hour. The faint scent of perfume and food wafted in behind her. Who was that? Wale asked, his tone sharp as he watched her walk in, attempting to mask the hurt and confusion bubbling beneath the surface. Oh, it's my work husband, Steve, she replied breezily, her hands filled with a takeout bag. Work husband, Wale echoed, feeling the sting of her words hit him like a slap. When did you start calling anyone else your husband? Lola laughed lightly, brushing off his discomfort. Wale, it's not that deep, it's just a joke. Not that deep, Wale shot back, hurt and frustration spilling over. You come home almost at midnight, and all you have to say is that it's just a joke. It was Steve's birthday, and we went out to eat, she said, her tone growing defensive as she set the takeout bag on the counter. Wale crossed his arms, trying to contain the storm brewing inside him. I was told you left work by 5. What took you so long? Lola sighed, running her hands through her hair. It was a big restaurant, Wale. We had to wait for an empty table, and there was traffic. You know how it is in the city. Traffic, he asked, disbelief pouring from his words. You couldn't even call me. I was having dinner, it slipped my mind, she shot back, her frustration mingling with exhaustion. Look, I'm glad you had fun, Wale said, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. But it just feels wrong that you didn't bother to let me know. You know how I worry. Lola narrowed her eyes, the light-heartedness of the evening fading. You're overreacting. Wale, Steve is just a friend. A friend who takes you out on dinner on his birthday. A friend who you're comfortable enough to call your work husband. Wale, please, Lola said, her voice softening as she stepped closer. You're making a big deal out of nothing. Can't we just enjoy the night? I brought food. Food, he echoed, staring at the takeout bag as if it held all the answers. I just want you to be honest with me, Lola. You've been distant lately, and all I can think about is what is going on between you and Steve. Lola's expression shifted. Frustration and sadness intertwining in her eyes. You think I would cheat on you? After everything we've built together? I don't know what to think anymore. Wale snapped. I care about you, Wale. Can't you see that? But I don't feel it. Not with you spending so much time with him. I just want to know where I stand, he whispered, feeling the weight of desperation settle in his chest. Lola's shoulders slumped. The fight visibly leaving her as she looked at him. You're still my husband, Wale. I love you. Please don't let this ruin us. Lola stepped closer, hands finding his. Wale felt the tears stink his eyes, but he fought them back. He didn't want to lose her, but he couldn't shake the feeling of something slipping away. I just don't want to lose you. That night, as Wale laid in bed next to Lola, he couldn't shake the feeling of loneliness that enveloped him. They were side by side, but it felt like they were worlds apart. And as sleep finally claimed him, the doubts and fears danced in his mind, whispering promises of betrayal he couldn't ignore. Wale leaned back in his office chair, staring blankly at the wall opposite him. The usual buzz of conversation and the clattering of keyboards faded into the background, as his mind replayed the same troubling thoughts over and over again. His best friend Tade sat across from him, concern etched on his face. Guy, Lola can never cheat on you, Tade said, leaning forward, his voice firm. You know that. She loves you. Wale sighed deeply, rubbing his temples as if trying to erase the worry etched into his mind. I know she loves me, he replied. His voice heavy with doubt, but every day it's Steve this, Steve that. I can't help but worry. Have you talked to her about it? Tade asked, crossing his arms. You can't just sit back and stew in your insecurities. I've tried, Wale muttered, shaking his head, but it's like every time I bring it up, she brushes it off. She doesn't see how much it bothers me. Tade leaned back, considering his friend's words. Maybe you need to find out more about this Steve guy, just to ease your mind. Wale brow furrowed. As he thought about it, you really think I should? Why not? It might put your mind at ease, Tade encouraged. Just be careful, you don't want to jump to conclusions. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of his anxiety only grew heavier. Every mention of Steve became a nail in his heart. Each laugh shared between Lola and her colleague felt like a betrayal. Finally, in a moment of desperation, Wale made a bold decision. He would quit his job and apply to be a cleaner at Lola's office. If he could get close enough to see how she interacted with Steve, he would finally have the answers he sought. Are you really going to do this? Tade asked, disbelief written all over his face when Wale shared his plan over coffee one afternoon. I have to, Wale replied, determination shining in his eyes. I need to know the truth. I can't keep living like this. Tade sighed, shaking his head. Just promise me you'll keep your cool and not do anything rash. The day of his first shift as a cleaner arrived. Wale entered the building, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead, and the air thick with scent of fresh coffee. His heart raced with anticipation and dread as he donned his cleaning uniform. The office felt alive with laughter and chatter, but Wale could only focus on one thing, Lola. As he cleaned the decks and vacuumed the floors, Wale kept an eye out to avoid Lola, as she didn't know he had quit. The tension in his chest tightened every time he heard a man's voice or a woman's laughter. He steadied himself to breathe, trying to shake off the rising panic. At lunchtime, Wale was in the break room, tidying up after a meeting when he spotted an elderly man sitting at one of the tables, a white cane resting beside him. Wale had not seen him around the office all day. With the hum of conversation surrounding him, he approached the man, trying to put on a friendly face. Good afternoon, Wale greeted, forcing a smile despite the turmoil within him. The elderly man looked up, his clouded eyes shining in warmth. Good afternoon, he said, extending a hand. Nice to meet you, young man. Wale, he replied, shaking the man's hand. There was an unexpected comfort in the man's firm grip. I'm one of the new cleaners here. Ah, wonderful. We need more helping hands around here, the old man said cheerfully. So how do you like it so far? It's okay, Wale said, glancing around nervously. Just trying to get used to everything. The man chuckled softly. It's a great place to work. You find everyone's friendly once you get to know them. Wale nodded, but his head raised with a mixture of anxiety and curiosity. Do you work here often? Wale asked. More often than I would like, the other man joked. But it keeps me busy. The people here treat me well. They see me for who I am, not just my disability. What do you mean? Wale asked, intrigued, a hint of sadness creeping into the man's voice. I lost my sight a few months ago. My wife couldn't undo it and left. But yeah, I'm treated like a regular person. I appreciate that, especially my colleague Lola. Wiley's heart dropped as the realization hit him. Wait, you Steve? The Steve? Steve nodded, a friendly smile on his face. Yes, that's me, the one and only. Wiley was momentarily speechless. He had imagined someone much younger, perhaps a rival in the workplace. Wiley finally managed to say, oh, feeling a mix of shame and relief washed over him. Just then, the door swung open and Lola entered the break room, a smile radiant as she spotted Steve. Steve, there you are. I've been looking for you, she exclaimed, her voice full of warmth. Wale's heart raced as he watched her approach. What are you doing here? She asked, glancing at Wale with a hint of confusion. I was just getting to know Steve, Wale said, trying to keep his voice steady. Oh, great, but shouldn't you be at work? Lola asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Steve, meet my husband, Wale. Your husband is great company, Steve chuckled. We've been chatting. A warm smile on his face. Lola turned to Wale, her brow furrowing slightly. Are you okay? You look a little pale. I'm fine, he said quickly, forcing a smile, just tired. Lola stepped closer, concern etched on her face. You know you can talk to me about anything, right? Yeah, of course, he replied. But his heart felt heavy with the weight of his earlier suspicions. As Lola and Steve continued their conversation, Wale stood back. This man wasn't the threat he had imagined. He was a friend. Later that evening, Wale sat on the couch in his living room, his phone in his hand. He dialed Tade's number, his mind racing with everything he had learned. Hey, what's up? Tade asked cheerfully. Hey man, Wale said, his voice shaky with emotion. I messed up. I thought Lola was cheating on me with this Steve guy and I quit my job over nothing. Tade chuckled and Wale felt a pang of embarrassment. I didn't submit the resignation letter, Wale. Tade reviewed, the stone lighthearted. I applied for leave on your behalf instead. What? Wale exclaimed. Is that reason? Why would you do that? Because I knew you needed time to think, Tade replied, and I figured you'd come to your senses. Wale shook his head in disbelief, a smile spreading across his face. You're unbelievable. Just don't do anything rash again, okay? Tade said, his tone shifting to serious. Talk to Lola. Trust her. She loves you. I will, Wale promised. Feeling lighter than he had in weeks, I'll make it right. As they hung up, Wale took a deep breath. Realizing the importance of trust in a relationship, he would face his fears and rebuild the connection with Lola. He knew the road ahead might not be easy, but with trust, love and open communication, they could overcome anything together, and for the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful about the future.